The Lamborghini Urus is a particularly controversial vehicle, and I'll say that despite having a twin-turbo 4-liter V8 under the hood, a price tag of north of $200,000, there's quite a bit of conversation surrounding this car and super SUVs in general. So what I'm going to answer today is why I think the Urus is worth $250,000 as I drive it through these canyon roads in a bright early morning. So let's start with the important figures, the power. So 4-liter twin-turbo V8, 650 horsepower, 627 pound-feet of torque. That's enough to shoot this behemoth to 60 miles an hour in a quoted 3.5 seconds. However, others have tested Uruses in the real world and have found results much closer to 3 seconds. But as you can see, as I hustle it down this canyon, is it a little bouncy? Sure, but it's sticky nonetheless. And that's because this vehicle has a dynamic air suspension with an anti-roll system, which analyzes the road and adjusts the suspension to keep you not only stable, but to give you the highest amount of grip as you're driving very quickly. Back to the powertrain, you have an 8-speed automatic transmission. It is very quick and it is very, very direct. I actually really like the transmission and how sort of harsh it is. With some of the downshifts, it can be a little violent, and I kind of like that. It gives this a little bit of drama. Now, this vehicle does have all-wheel drive. It is a 40-60 split, so most of the power is going to the rear wheel, so it does feel a little bit more rear-wheel drive than it does a traditional sort of all-wheel drive Audi, and we'll get to the Audiness in a little bit. However, so 40-60 split, the rear wheels can get up to 87% of the total amount of torque. The front can get up to 70%. So again, it is still a rear bias system, and I appreciate that. I think it still makes the Urus feel a little bit more sporty despite it being a massive SUV. Surprisingly, one of the greatest strengths of the Urus is how fast it is. And I mean how fast it is because this giant SUV can accelerate in a way that I really didn't expect. And it's easy to look at some of its stats on paper, 0 to 60. It's not the fastest nowadays, but remember, we're in a massive SUV. So as soon as you put your foot down, the whole thing hunkers down and the rear squats, and you're kind of off to the races. And there's power all over. Now, this engine makes most of its torque between 2,000 and 4,000 RPM. And up here in the canyons, I love that I'm always ready for full torque. So I'm, cruising at 3rd gear through these sort of sweeping turns, but at any moment I can stab the throttle and I have full power. There's no delay, no lag. It's very immediate. It sort of wants to go at all times. Now, we should talk about why it wants to do that. That's because I am in the Corsa mode. There's several different driving modes. You can put it in a sort of normal street mode, which, why don't we do that right now, actually? Strada. Quiet. Comfortable. All of a sudden, the Urus kind of changes its tone completely, and now we're in this like glidey, comfortable, cushy, silent SUV, which is really interesting how much of a dual personality this thing has. So that's Strada. We don't want to stay there too long. So Sport is a little bit above that. And I think Sport is a nice middle point between the aggressiveness of Corsa and the sort of docileness of Strada, because right now, you see, you can hear a little bit more engine, but still pretty comfortable. It's not quite as stiff or bouncy as you saw me sort of bouncing around in Corsa mode. So Sport is a good happy medium, and frankly, for the canyons, it's a little bit, this is probably the mode I would be in if I wasn't in a full aggressive mode, but we're driving fast, so we're gonna stick it into Corsa. Now, I do have the manual gear selection on, so I am picking my own gears myself. You can see as soon as you put it into Corsa, the whole thing kind of stiffens up, and you get that anti-roll system going. This vehicle also has 4-wheel steering, which helps give it a surprisingly good turning radius despite being big and having chunky, wide tires. Now, aside from the suspension and power, we also have to talk about the brakes, because the brakes on this vehicle are fantastic. fantastic. I don't know what happened over at Lamborghini that they decided, let's just put the best brakes we can on absolutely everything. The Huracan STO I drove about a month ago, that had phenomenal brakes, but they were just essentially out of the race car. And this thing has the largest set of carbon ceramics ever fitted to a production vehicle. They are enormous. So the result is that even if I'm going at speed, the Urus can pull G-forces braking. It's so insanely violent the way it can brake. And again, I've been hustling this SUV up and down here quite a lot this morning without much issue. They don't seem to fade or complain. They just give you stopping power, which is, you know, very much important when you're driving something that is as enormous as a family SUV with a huge V8 up front and 650 horsepower. So why would you pay $250,000 for a super SUV? Now, the Urus, unlike its Audi siblings or the Bentayga or anything like that, it's built in its own factory. It's completely separate. It doesn't share a production line or anything despite sharing similar components. Now, a lot of the Urus is also made by hand. Now, all the stitching in here feels very, very high quality. The leather feels nicely made. We have a good choice of materials. We have Alcantara in the doors. There's contrasting colors to the leather. The quality in here feels befitting of a six-figure SUV, no doubt about that. Now, the one thing I don't absolutely love in the spec that I'm driving is a sort of wooden dash that feels a bit odd in a super SUV. Other than that, it feels really nice in here. And even all your sun visors are covered in leather and they have contrast stitching. Very nice touches. Now, I also have a digital instrument cluster in front of me, which changes its display as I go through the driving modes that I talked about earlier. I also have a big central infotainment screen, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, the usual suspects, but it's very high quality. And it also has a sort of vibrating response when you select something, which lets you know you picked the right thing. It's very cool if you're driving and you kind of want to select something. It's very user-friendly. So other than that, I feel like we should talk about the cluster of levers and things in the center here, because that's how you operate the Urus. So basically, the main thing you have is the red switch in the middle, start stop. You have your reverse, which is this lever you pull back. You have your driving mode on the left, and you have your individual selector on the right. Now we should talk about one of the most controversial things about the Urus, and that is its design. For me, sorry, a little acceleration interruption. So design. So I feel like the Urus has to be a little wild because it is a Lamborghini. If it had a very docile exterior design, I feel like it wouldn't work. And we can talk sales figures all day. Lamborghini literally cannot build these fast enough. So people love the Urus. Now, in terms of me personally, I think it's really dependent on color. I prefer an Urus in yellow or red or even blue, something a little bit more vibrant to match the wild exterior. The matte white that my tester has looks great in the sunlight, but looks perhaps a little bit docile in other areas and kind of, you know, doesn't really let the Urus's design or sort of its kind of craziness shine through. Now, if you want to tone down the Urus, you can get one in black, and it looks a lot more sleek. However, for me, I think you're buying a Lamborghini, friggin' expensive Lamborghini, just go bright colors, just go all out and, you know, enjoy it. That's kind of my take on that. Other than that, the Urus is incredibly comfortable on the highway and every day. Sound deadening is good. The freaking stereo is fantastic. It's really easy to drive, really easy to maneuver. The brakes, despite them being enormous and carbon ceramic, they're nicely tuned for around town. They don't feel very grabby or difficult to operate at all. It's very easy to drive the Urus every single day. And I feel like that's what someone who buys this thing should do. Buy it, put 100,000 miles on it. Its powertrain, speaking of the powertrain, its powertrain isn't exotic enough to feel like it'll be fragile or anything. Just buy it and drive it. And I've been enjoying this thing, actually. And yeah, I think that perfectly describes what I feel about the Urus. I think it's surprisingly good. I'm just surprised by what this enormous SUV can do and the way it handles itself, even at insanely high speeds. So with that, I want to thank you guys all so much for watching this video. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. It'll help us grow. And I've got a ton of new supercar content coming along the way. But if there's any vehicle, anything you want me to see, or review specifically, please make sure to leave that in the comments, because I am listening and I will pick and I will take a look at pretty much anything. Now, to sign off, how about a little acceleration? I think that's warranted. Let's get through this little bend here and we'll send it one last time for the Urus. Ready? And this thing is so crazy. Oh my God.